So by now you know the student prayer for students and teachers combined. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish our learning and nourish us both. May we work together with extremely great and vigorous energy. May our study lead to illumination. We may not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. A typical question that often arises is, in the practical application of the Vedanta philosophy, how do we maintain our enthusiasm? You know, sometimes we have peaks and troughs in terms of enthusiasm for any subjects. And so I suppose sometimes we have to evaluate what makes our enthusiasm curve go down. And when we understand why that is, then we can take measures. But I think we can also take preventative measures. We can always store the mind up, push it always up and onwards. We can always all agree with the various prayers contained in the Vedas. May noble thoughts come to us from all sides. And really, we have to maintain a kind of internal dialogue with ourselves continuously. What we might find is that whenever there is a decline in our enthusiasm, it is because we have forgotten some primary principles, and we have left aside an automatic internal dialogue. In fact, it may not even be a dialogue, it's more likely a monologue. And we fail to make it a dialogue. We fail to make a response. You see, all of our thoughts are accompanied by concepts, and concepts are always expressed internally and externally as well in words. And we will find that we have persuaded ourselves in one way or the other. Now, the Katha Upanishad gives us two options. It portrays two different paths, two different ways. The preferable way is one way, the pleasurable way is another way, and the Bhagavad Gita echoes this approach. And so we are always in a position where we can make a choice, we can make a decision. Sometimes we're not even aware that we make a decision, but surely as anything, we make a decision. And in the subconscious mind, there is an automatic script going on, which is conditioned by two factors. One factor would be, according to the Vedanta way of thinking, the yogic way of thinking, is we have some leftover stuff from previous lives. We carry some baggage across with us, according to our law of causality and sowing and reaping and continuation of life and so on. So we call this karma, which doesn't just mean consequences and effects. It means the actions, and that includes mental actions. And most physical actions are preceded by mental actions, unless they're in the autonomic range, in which case we do things without thinking. We know how to digest our food, but we've forgotten all about it, and we leave it on automatic pilot, and that's fine. But there are other behavioral aspects that we deal with in the same way. We built up a habitual level, which is not necessarily in our favor and was originally based on this choice. Shall we go this way or shall we go that way? And we can, with all great enthusiasm, choose to go one way, probably the preferable way, which is based on a couple of factors. Today's thought was oriented around Buddha because, generally speaking, throughout most of the world, other than India and Nepal, Buddha's birthday is celebrated on Friday, and we kind of missed it. So a few days later, we put it up again, that this is the widely celebrated birth of Buddha on Friday, 26th. Now, the great lesson of Buddha is this, that he was surrounded by the one path that was the pleasurable. This was deliberate, so we are told, because there was this idea, either he will be a great renunciant monk or he'll be an outstanding monarch, prince, ultimately to become a monarch. And so that implies he has the inner wisdom to do both things, because both paths require inner wisdom, a stable mind. Now, how is it then that Gautama Siddhartha, the prince, can avoid any amount of pain? Even as a child, he must have somehow fallen down and scraped his knee. And when we come into the world, we don't come in laughing and gurgling. We come in crying, and there must be some kind of reason for that. We come in a little kicking and screaming. We were all comfortable in the mother's womb. There was the faint drumbeat of the mother's heart. There was the beautiful comfort of a liquid environment. It was all warm and cozy. We didn't have to worry about food. We were fed. And the umbilicus attachment was a sure way of doing it. And we might even say that for 9 months, the mother's thoughts became our thoughts, and the effects of the mother's thoughts became ours. So there's a fundamental principle in the whole of this. The way we think manifests and condenses as all the things that you receive. The scenes that you constructed were originally thoughts, and thoughts enforced with feelings will inevitably condense. This is a natural law. We may call this law a game of life. And there's a book that I recommend, a foundational book to everybody, which is The Game of Life and How to Play It. It's always a book that I give to first timers, as it were, introduced introducing themselves into this Vedanta philosophy, because it is evident that the author, and it was written a long time ago, it was written actually between the 2 world wars, and Florence Scovel Shinn uses the language of yoga. That is the psychology that is presented of a conscious mind. This is our normal kind of waking world. Our subconscious mind, which is normally not directed, but was originally items that were in the conscious field, and then put into our library and put into our unconscious underlying layer, and surfaces once the clues come out. We call this impressions. But then there's a superconscious mind, and she's using exactly that language, and it's exactly the language that is being used, English language that is being used by Swami Vivekananda in his Raja Yoga. So there's clear indication that she must have studied that book. And she must have come to the psychological conclusions that the yogis come across, namely that it's more than positive thinking. The secret, the key to everything is encapsulated in the word. And when we find our enthusiasm going down, we will discover that we just left all the words, all the language of the unconscious mind to surface by itself without controlling it. Or we didn't bother to reform by introducing the highest and positive and most noble words we can think of in the unconscious mind, building up a healthy habit. We didn't bother to deliberately and consciously use the value and the wonderful, indispensable tool of image making. Image making means that in order to have a dialogue with our own minds, where the noblest and purest, the highest, the most rewarding thoughts dominate, requires doing it in words. We might say affirmations. We might say mantras. That's what's necessary. And to do that, we also have to accompany with 2 other things. The one is more of an effect. The second thing that has to be, or the one thing that has to be its companion, is the feeling. If you're fired up, if you have an enthusiastic feeling about something, then you'll pursue it. It is only when that desire decreases or goes completely that we come across this lack of persistence in pursuing what we might call a goal. There are three things that are always necessary: a great desire for what we want, a great determination to get it, and a dedication, eat it, drink it, sleep it, make sure that it comes to its conclusion. We can summarize this in spiritual life as yearning. Yearning for freedom. There are 4 qualifications for any student, but the most important thing, unless you can develop this yearning, then we can't sustain our effort. Our effort will automatically be there when we cultivate our level of enthusiasm. And the effect of this will be the effect of constructing words, a dialogue in our own mind to keep this going, is the feeling. Because desire is a feeling. It's not an intellectual construct. It can be an idea, it can be a wish, but when it comes to the level of desire, determination, dedication, the enthusiasm that we're talking about is an emotional feeling. And it is this that has to be stirred up constantly. Now we have ways of doing it. Music is a way. The quickest and easiest way to change a mood is to put some music on. If you want to be fully awake, if you want to be full of morning enthusiasm, then you can put something which is upbeat. Musicians know the secrets of moods of the day. In classical Karnataka music, there are ragas. You cannot play an afternoon one or an evening one in the morning. There's a mood that has to be cultivated. And we have to consciously cultivate our moods based on sound principles. So the sound principle is not an emotional one. The emotions have to be cultivated. The sound principle is an intellectual one. It is one which is carefully reasoned out. And we forget this reasoning when we get emotionally tied up with other things which are not associated with our central desire. So let us see what this basis is. Well, the basis in Vedanta is very clear. And we're now going to Vedanta as opposed to yoga as a philosophy which is supplemented, but also as a practice. The practice of Vedanta is called yoga. So what are these fundamental principles of the Vedanta philosophy? These are all contained in the Vedantic texts that we call Upanishads. And so our fundamental study in Vedanta is to go to these texts straight away, the texts of the Vedanta. And then that requires some proof, because the ultimate reality is transcendental. That means it transcends the senses, it transcends our waking world. But if we look carefully, this ultimate reality is reflected in it and can act as clues toward it. The best way of spontaneously contacting something that is transcendental, transcending, in other words, our normal world of so-called pain, is pain itself. Pain itself, we learn more from it than we do from pleasure. And pleasure, of course, is a kind of pleasure-pain, part of a pleasure-pain syndrome, because if you have a desire based on the waking state of this world of objects and people and places and events, what we sometimes call our normal world, and we want to derive some kind of pleasure for it on a false understanding that our world is lacking something and we need to supplement it from the outside, then that gives us a tendency to bring out a desire for an objective satisfaction. And we know that all objective satisfactions are temporary. If we want an ice cream on a summer day, well, be sure that we can satisfy it for an hour or two, maybe a day. But at some point or other, the unconscious mind will be like a child and say, whoa, I just saw somebody licking an ice cream, I want it. So how to control this, how to control it, we have to first understand the principles. And since the ultimate reality transcends everything or anything that we know of, then we have to see how to handle such a thing. We have to find proof or evidence of this transcendental truth. It's not perceived by the senses, it's not understood by the mind. It's a matter of undoubted experience because it's the innermost consciousness of ourselves. When we say I, we're aware of it. And it's directly and immediately experienced without the instrumentality of the senses and the instrumentality of the mind. And it doesn't depend on its proof for its proof on external authority, such as scripture. It's independent. And the perception of all this outside world it's neither direct nor is it immediate, but it's dependent upon the senses and the mind, and it's always colored by them. So on the other hand, the experience of reality, what we call this transcendent ultimate principle, is both immediate and it's direct. This is the difference. Sometimes it comes as a flash of inspiration that fires us up, makes our enthusiasm strong. We get a profound experience. It could be stimulated by music. It could be stimulated by a scene. It could be stimulated by observing a moment of human compassion, where the highest ideals shine through the bestiality part of what we call manhood. And so, through the practice of rigid spiritual discipline, where we are absolutely calm, then it's the consciousness in person, in you, that experiences this universal consciousness. And the two being actually in reality one and identical. These are the principles. This is the fundamental principle that we have to be absolutely convinced of. And there are infinite possibilities for self-deception, which we have to overcome. So we have to cultivate some kind of protection. In order to protect us from all the errors of delusion that we have, the ancient sages, the rishis, the seers of the Vedanta, they lay down 3 criteria. And these criteria can also be applied for any other thing that we have. It can be applied and is applied in science. And so the first thing is Shruti, that is a certain acceptance of a credible authority. And the credible authority we find in the Upanishads. But don't think that this is the ultimate, because it has to be proven. We just accept it. Not blindly, but just provisionally. All right, we have to start somewhere. Some principles we have to accept. Because the gut doesn't tell us, our fundamental instinct does not tell us that this world is some kind of appearance and disappearance, an apparitional world. Our instinct says this is real. When people talk about reality, this is what they're talking about, not understanding something that appears and disappears cannot come within the strict definition of reality. Something that changes cannot come within the strict definition of reality. So if we are philosophical, we'll say, well, it's not real, but it's still only intellectual. It's still only in principle. We still haven't really understood it internally. In the innermost depths of the heart, we haven't understood it. It is that which we have to cultivate. So anyway, some scriptural authority has to be there, Shruti. Then yukti, reasoning, has to be there. It's no good saying, well, scripture says this and it doesn't make sense to me. Never mind. I'll accept it anyway. No. It has to pass your own currency of reflection and reasoning. And then, of course, there has to be your personal experience of it, anubhava. And any one of these singly might enable us to realize partial truth. But when all three point to the same conclusion, then we know it's true. How does it work in science? Same principle. And scientists have now somehow deviated somewhat from it, that we take some credible authority, in other words, something that is widely accepted as indisputable for the time being, and suggests a model that is constructed with a predictive outcome, and then our laboratory experiments either prove or falsify this conclusion. But one of these by themselves doesn't do it. All these three have to be put up in a line. And the reasoning part of it in science will not only include that the model works, it solves all the problems, and the mathematics goes with it, and the simplicity required to provide something that is truthful, not just manufactured to fit. That's the danger. But a thoroughgoing, replicating model that can be reproduced by every other person with the idea of falsifying it and then discovering, yes, that's a simple example, of course. They say that water is 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Can we prove it? Yes, we take hydrogen, we take water, or we take hydrogen gas, I should say. We combine it with oxygen. We confine it within a tube. We find that the condensate of it is water. We can taste it and say, yes, that's water. It is the same thing then in spiritual life. And the meaning of the scriptures that contain recorded experiences of the knowers of the truth, they must be explained by a competent teacher. This is the same thing wherever we go. Even the greatest of scientists, say physicists, had an overseer of a certain project, certain research, and a thesis. So in order to free reasoning from the pitfalls of rationalization, we have to have a rigorous mental discipline. And these are prescribed by a teacher so that the aspirant may be grounded in detachment, not only from the external world, but also from your own preconditioned pet ideas and your kind of exclusive loyalties. All of these are there that enable a bias. Now, in the context of spirituality, this can be derived from religions. It can be derived from dogma and doctrine. And this system has to be rigorously applied to all of these things. When we look at the world, we have to see that all the ultimate values that we come across must be judged from the standard of eternity and not from the standard of time. And then the conclusions that we find in the Upanishads and the scriptures, reaffirmed by reasoning, they must be experienced by the spiritual practitioner, you yourself. That is the only final proof. It's very difficult to talk about proof. Proof is entirely subjective. And the only way is to find out for yourself and to have this direct experience of this ultimate truth, and to find out that that ultimate truth is the basis of the universe, and it's self-evident, it's non-contradictory, it's free from fear, it's free from frictions, it's free from disputes. And then the seer of this truth will perceive the truth everywhere and in everything. This surely will keep the motivation going when you see it. So There are a number of means to rally around this experience. I mentioned this cultivating this dialogue, using the word continuously, and the word can be formulated in terms of a protective thought that we call a mantra, which is their different types. And that is why, in answer to a question, how often should we repeat our mantra? And the answer comes 24 hours of the day. My own teacher was asked this question. That was his literal reply. 24 hours of the day. Not just when you're sitting, not just at separate times. But how can I do that when the mind is concentrated with this or that, is distracted by this or that? Well, the answer is in moments where the mind is not particularly occupied, internally repeat this. And a mantra is repeated in 3 ways, from less effective to more effective to absolutely effective. What is that? Well, the crude way of repeating a mantra will be verbal sound. But since a mantra is sacred and secret, normally if it's individual, if it's given by a competent teacher, then you will say it internally. And the less crude way, but not as effective, will be to repeat it with lips moving. This is not what we're talking about when we say repeating the mantra 24 hours of the day. We're talking of internal mental repetition, and that repetition is accompanied with the feeling with it. Now, some people may say, how can I concentrate on my mantra and continuous repeating it when there are so many other legitimate demands coming from the outside? And the answer is, no. This is it's like calling upon a name. Supposing I select any name from the group that is here and repeat it, the person within the hearing of it will immediately turn around. Yes, they'll respond. It is the same way with the ultimate principle, the divine, as expressed in a personal version of it. That is, your chosen ideal, and developing love for this, repeating the name. Just as when we love a dear one, let us say a child or a parent, or even a beloved of any kind, then repeating the name is equivalent to bringing their presence before us, experiencing their presence. And this is the use of a mantra throughout the day. What about when we are sitting? There's a different use for it. When we're sitting, we're now intimately inviting this ideal into ourselves, into the cave of the heart. The Upanishads declare it for meditation purposes as being in the cave of the heart of the size of a thumb, shining like that, and so on. It's not literally so, but for meditation purposes, we can make it so. And Patanjali gives us some wonderful, wonderful ideas of how to do that. Gives us a clue. For example, you can meditate on the internal light, but you can meditate on anything which is inspiring, anything that elevates the mind, that brings the mind and rallies the mind to the central point of unity, which we call this ultimate truth. And then the mind becomes a revealing factor. But it's all to do with the mind. It's the mind that deludes us. It's the mind that reveals the truth for us. Simply because there are these 3 evolutionary forces that are contained within the whole of nature, including the mind, the psyche, and that we call gunas, or binding elements. Gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And we have to transcend these. We have to go to a condition of tri-gunatita, transcending the 3 gunas, these 3 dimensions. And we do it by continuously noticing, here is a wave coming. Let us put a counter wave to it. If it is useless to us, what do we mean by useless? If it's harmful to us. Most of the waves that come are ultimately harmful to us. We don't recognize this very often, and yet is necessary to really, really understand. And why are they harmful to us? Because they contain the one inherent obstacle that is stopping in the way of our inherent freedom and our inherent illuminating realization. And that is egoism. Egoism means that the central ultimate entity in me, the seer, gets mixed up with the object of seeing, get mixed up with the instrumentality of it. And I often use this example, I think it's a good one, of mixing yourself as a driver up with the instrumentality of a car and its engine. We make that distinction by changing our language. We say, this is my car. It's a car that belongs to an independent driver, me. I drive the car. I'm not the car. So I am the person who owns the car. I'm the person who drives the car, but I'm not the car. So this fundamental error is egoism, and this is not only an obstacle, but it's a pain-bearing obstacle. All our difficulties in life are due to this one factor. Now, Buddha grew up in a seemingly pain-free environment, although we can definitely assume it wasn't 100% pain-free. And now he takes his charioteer, Chala, come on, let us go out. And he sees these four things, and he sees and he wonders because he's never seen these and therefore not pondered on them. So, but you see, the fact of going out means there's an inherent desire to get out of a restricted environment and find out what else is happening beyond the palace walls. So he does that, and he gets quite a surprise. It makes him reflect. It makes him think. This is the beginning. So what is he reflecting on? He's reflecting on disease and poverty and death. And he's also reflecting on somebody who decides voluntarily to shave off his head, mundaka, to shave off symbolically and go into this environment as a religious aspirant, as a seeker. And he wonders, why would somebody go to that extent? And he realizes it's to solve these pain, these difficulties, these problems of pain, physical pain. I've solved these problems of mental pain also, solved these problems of other forms of distress. And finally, we thought we were going to live forever. No, it's the most common misunderstanding. We'll live forever. No, we won't. You know it. But we put it aside. We don't want to address it. We call it a morbid subject. No, it's a factual subject. We have to face it. And so he decided, let me find out the answers to this. And like everybody with great enthusiasm, he goes to great lengths, great aesthetic lengths, assuming that the answer is in a world denying practice. Takes up the extreme practices of yoga, depriving yourself of food, fasting, but not yielding anything. Only yielding the pain that he's trying to get away from. Then fed up with that and realizing, no, I have to figure this out for myself. With no map, no compass, he sits down boldly and realizes through this very combination, the combination of listening to his own intuition ultimately and having this revelation, which is a positive revelation, going from the silent one of the Shakya clan, eventually Gautama Siddhartha, a prince of nobility, gets transformed into one of enlightened intellect called Buddha. The Buddhi gets enlightened. So how did he manage doing this meditation practice? One was non-resistance. Resist ye not evil. This is the principle contained for the biblical people. Psychologically, we say, all these things, we don't resist an indisciplined mind. We don't resist thoughts that come out. We deal with them as a right to exist, but we deal with them in a friendly way. We play a game of guiding thought. we take these and we realize we have the opportunity through the gift of time to put something positive in. And the more positive, the better. And we can only do this through words and corresponding concepts. That's what keeps our enthusiasm going. Keeping our attention steadily tuned into the glory of the divine self is the way. Constantly doing it. The equivalent in theistic terms as practicing the presence of the divine, constantly practicing it. In the words of my guru, it is repeating the mantra 24 hours of the day, constantly doing it. Knowing that, of course, the mind will not be initially constantly directed like this, constantly in this state. The practice is to develop it, and to develop it with a sporting attitude. In terms of this book, The Game of Life and How to Play It, the book begins with a marvelous statement. Most people consider life a battle, but it's not a battle, it's a game. What a wonderful statement. What a wonderful Vedantic statement. What a wonderful yogic statement. When I say yogic statement, it is bringing up counter waves within the mind in such a way that we neutralize everything that would be harmful to us, namely egoistic tendencies, whether it's in terms of torpidity and laziness, or whether it's in the form of constant self-orientated activities, consciously or unconsciously directed toward our own benefit. There are skeptics who say there's no such thing as altruism. Even if you build a hospital, it'd be for your own benefit. There's a great dialogue like that in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, if we care to read that. You see, that somebody does a lot of good, known well for doing this good, and yet, yes, but if you really look at it, intention might be good, yes, fundamentally, but unfortunately it's all spoiled by an advertisement. The anonymity is no longer that. I'm socially orientated, and I like to, contribute toward the Children's Hospital. But that's just between you and me. Don't tell anybody, because last week I contributed so much to their new wing. And they've asked me, would I put a plaque there? And I said, well, if you really want to, okay. See? So this is not altruistic. Not at all. Altruism says an anonymous donation goes in. I won't tell anybody about it. It's between me and the divine author of prosperity. Finished. May everybody benefit from it. Nobody knows about it. It's a complete secret. Jesus illustrates it by two people going into the synagogue. One person with all the trappings of religiosity stands in the front, and another person humbly sits at the back, and they puts in a small mite, small coin. That's all they have to offer. Another person puts in a generous donation and puffs their breast out. Look at what I did. I supported whoever it was, let us say, the Vedanta Society. I gave so many thousands of euros. And now look what happens. They're ignoring me or something of that nature. Not at all. You put it in. Let nobody know about it, And that would be the attitude. And I'd give it freely without expecting any reward from it or any rights about it. I give it because out of pure love I give it. Finished. So we have to analyze all these waves that come up in the mind, and we have to see them for what they are and play a game. And this game is called giving and receiving, or sowing and reaping. In order to receive, we have to give. Not grudgingly, but generously. Whatever a person sows, and also that person will reap. And this means that whatever we send out in a word or a deed is a word translated into action, will return to us. What that person gives, that person will receive. Now it works both ways. If you hate, then you'll get hate. You'll be hated. If you love, you'll be loved. If you are criticizing, you give out criticism, then you'll receive criticism. We have the Mother Sharada Devi's words given to us, put now in our center in a kind of poetic form or rhyming form, you see. Let us not accuse or demand or complain, but let's love, respect, let's help. Let's not blame. Any fault we find with others, no fault to find except our own. If you want peace of mind, find your own faults. Don't look at the faults of others. These are profound words. If everybody practiced it, it goes on to say, you need to make the whole world your own. And every stranger you encounter, make them feel at home. Entertain them. Your guest is God, says our Upanishads. Let your mother be a God unto you. Let your father let your teacher, and so on and so forth. Let your guest be a God unto you. So this is the noblest sentiments we can ever find in relation to people. So if we give out criticism, we'll receive criticism. If we cheat, we'll be cheated. If we tell untruths, we'll be lied to. And we're also taught that the imaging faculty plays a leading part in the game of life. We have to use the full capacity of our imagination. Now, Patanjali mentions in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras that there are a number of types of waves, vrittis, that arise in the mental field. And he mentions a number of them. He mentions, true knowledge, false knowledge. But there's an interesting thing, Shabda Jnana. Verbal delusion, he mentions. Verbal delusion follows from words that have no corresponding reality. And words are firstly formulated internally. So, vikalpa. Now, there's a commentary to this that Swami Vivekananda gives. He says there's another class of vrittis, or way it's called vikalpa. A word is uttered, and we don't wait to consider its meaning. We jump to a conclusion immediately. And we can only do that through our imagination. We imagine that there are enemies everywhere. We imagine something which is not really there, and we come to a reactive conclusion. And we find most of our problems are because our imagination ran wild. And so he goes on to say, it's a sign of weakness of the chitta, the mind, the consciousness in the mind. And now you can understand the theory of restraint. The weaker the person, the less he has of restraint. We'll examine ourselves always by that test. And when you're going to be angry or miserable, or in any way when you see negative words come up within you, this monologue, poor me, and so on, then reason it out how it is that some news has come to you and is affecting the mind uncontrollably, throwing your mind into vrittis, into waves. And psychologically, waves are the difficulty. When all these waves cease, then we have found out the purpose of this yoga, which in this case is deemed to be concentration on meditation. What is that? Yoga, chitta nivriti nirodha. You see, the absence of waves, often misunderstood. It is the yoga chitta vritti nirodha. It is the restraining the mind stuff from taking various forms. It's not suppressing it. How do we restrain it? We see these thoughts come out like carriages in a train, like cars in a train coming and going. We have no business interfering with them. The mere act of watching them is a stabilizing thing. It centralizes our feeling. It's a curious experience. Those people who meditated for the first time, let's say in Buddhist meditation, will see, wow, this is for the first time I close my eyes. When I open them in the morning, I see the glorious, colorful life. I'm filled with great enthusiasm, but it's an unusual experience for me to close my eyes. There's a great, well-known Glaswegian comedian, Billy Connolly is his name, who came across Buddhist meditation. He says it's a remarkable experience that for the first time I closed my eyes and then saw these thoughts, and I said to this Buddhist monk who was teaching me, I said, it's very difficult because when I sit, all these things come up in the mind. And the monk says, well, yes, watch them, allow them, don't resist them. Resist ye not evil. And then replace them, once the mind is settled, with the imagery of your own. And whatever you want comes to be. On what basis? There's a law, for example, of prosperity. It's a law. Why should there be a law like that? Because all our abundance in all our world comes from not our mind, it comes from a cosmic mind, a universal broadcasting station. One of the greatest messages given to the race through all the scriptures, really, is that this divine ultimate reality that we can call God is our supply, and that we can release this through a spoken word. It belongs to us by divine right. And so this is a law of prosperity. And the author of this book, A Game of Life and How to Play It, gives innumerable examples based on this power of the word. And the next chapter goes on to absolutely emphasize it. The power of the word, in other words, the power of thought expressed as formulated words. Strong, true, wise, full, free, truth, beauty, goodness, love, harmony, not allowing an opportunity for any negative, self-orientated thought to enter. A person knowing the power of the word, says the author, becomes very careful of his conversation. He has only to watch the reaction of the words to know they do not return void. No word is wasted, no word is empty. And how many words do we say to ourselves? Through his spoken word, man is continually making laws for himself. And then he gives a number of examples. And then if you follow the logic of this chapter, there is the law of non-resistance, which we have mentioned, which we can call vain imagination. And we can call this, of course, verbal delusion, vikalpa. And then if we go along we see that there is a law, of causal law, this law of sowing and reaping, which is just absolutely conclusive. It's indisputable that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and every effect has a cause. And along with that should be a law of forgiveness. Because you see, cows chew the cud. They have 4 stomachs, they bring it up. We always find them chewing. And we wonder what they're thinking when they chew. You know, there's that expression. They must be reflecting on this as they chew. But we chew the cud of resentment. We can chew it for hours together, and days together, and weeks together, and months together, and years together. And each one of these internal monologues of resentment, this lack of forgiveness, is eating away at our physicality and is eating away at our mind. It is destroying us. It is a self-destructive behavior. Now, when we know all these laws, even just intellectually, then we have to practice a counter movement. Put in words of joy, put in words which are truthful, What is that truth for? That there is an infinite abundance around us, that we can tap into it at any moment in time using the instrumentation of imagination and words and accompanying thoughts. So when we know that we have the power and the workings of the mind in our hands, under our infinite control and certain direction, when we know this, then we have access to infinite possibilities, infinite abundance, infinite resources. So when we know this, we will not be surprised by what we seem to have as impossible results. And there are so many examples given in this book. But underlining, what should we, more than anything else, cultivate? Love. Every person on this planet is taking his initiation in love, says the author of this book. A new commandment I give unto you, he quotes, that you love one another, expressed so beautifully by the Sharada Devi. Make every stranger feel at home, make the whole world your own. Don't criticize anybody else, start with yourself, and then move on from there, but love all. So Ouspensky, the great disciple of Gurdjieff, Ivan Gurdjieff, he states in his book Tertium Organum, love is a cosmic phenomena and opens to man the fourth dimensions, or the fourth dimensional world, the world of the wondrous. It's much easier to love, but we can only do that with the prerequisite of this forgiveness. And that comes from a new revaluation of things. That whatever we see is the divine. Everything is the divine. And when we use words, they are simply a manifestation of the original word or cosmic mind that becomes flesh and dwells amongst us. And every word and every thought that you speak manifests. It becomes born and dwells among you. And in this, we have to be astute enough in playing the game to look for moments of intuition, divine guidance, something that comes to your mind unexpectedly, not just a whim or a suggestion, but an openness to the possibility, creative possibility, that the cosmic mind is with us, directing us, and appears to us as a clue. In this interview with this Glaswegian, he says one of the effects of his meditation was that he would just wonder casually, I wonder about so-and-so, I haven't seen them for a long time. And then within an hour or so, seeing the person and meeting the person again, and he brings this up to his Buddhist teacher. Yes, you'll get many experiences like this on the way. These are encouraging phenomena. Don't be surprised. It's all cosmic mind. When somebody brings this, oh, I had this unusual experience, then I remind them with a shrug of the shoulders, yes, cosmic mind. It is all cosmic mind. There's nothing unusual. And that means that everything and anything is possible. Now here's the secret. You have to be thankful, not for what you have received, but thankful as if you have received it. In other words, the two things in your way are doubt and fear. The two things that are mitigating against motivation is doubt and fear. Doubt and fear are both conquered by faith. Faith is cultivated by the certainty and by the inner joy of all the positive things normally ignored around us. Supposing you have no access to the normal phenomena of the outside world, such as trees and flowers and people and places. Supposing you're in a small prison cell within four walls, then where will your attention lie? Well, we can commiserate, of course. That won't do us any good. That will simply have its deleterious effects on the body and mind. Or we can marvel at the wonder of breathing, the wonder of digestion, the gift of silence, the opportunity for contemplation. Because monastic life, see, monk, the word is derived from mono, one, by yourself, by yourself. Later on, of course, communities developed to encourage this self-withdrawal and self-reflection, no doubt. But the hermetic life, one, mono, gives you the opportunity to reflect deeply and to gain access to your own inner being and bring out such a joy. And so we find monks who voluntarily go into a cell. In fact, I think the word cell is derived from this concept of an isolated cell, an isolated unit where you are free to explore the interior nature of your own self. And you are a perfect self-expression of the divine design which is there. That removes all doubt. The imaging faculty is the creative faculty. It's necessary for a person to see the idea before it can be manifest, and then thank it as if it had arrived. Thanks, because there's no doubt that the potentiality of the word and thought combined will manifest. And so your thankfulness, you don't have to thank after you've received. When you put an order in on the internet, for example, as is common today, you don't assume it's not going to arrive. You assume it's going to arrive. And you become thankful for it. Not just when it arrives. The thankfulness is because the process has already been initiated. You make an order from an ordering company, some supply company, or something like that. You're confident that the order was accepted and received, and that the processing has taken place. The man in the stockroom is looking for the item. They're selecting it. They've got your address. They send it within the given time. All these are there. You just leave it. When it arrives, you're not taken aback by surprise. This is the same with life.
Swami, I have one question.
Yes.
After fully having listened to your speech, was kind of wondering what, from a philosophical point of view, what is hedonism? And if hedonism is not what humans' inner desire is at the end, not at the end, continually. Like, people prefer to have even if they go against their pain, or sometimes there is some pain, emotional pain, physical pain for some people. People tend to avoid pain, to go for pleasure activities, obviously. So what about hedonism? Can you please comment?
Yes, well, hedonism is based on a philosophy that says we eat, drink, and become merry, and we can do anything we like on the basis that possibly there's no afterlife, and we live for the moment, and that's it. But you can see the danger of it. So not recognizing the danger of it is a great, great problem. And many, many people who live a so-called normal life will embark on temporary hedonism anyway. They'll go to extreme. When I first came to Ireland, I was horrified to see how young people spend weekends in just a concentrated indulgence in terms of drinking alcohol and so on and so forth, what we call binge drinking, and then recovering on the weekend, when it's time to work, they go back and so on and so forth. We know that pleasure is not the answer, because pleasure is immediately followed by pain. And even if it's not directly, we know that engaging in sense pleasures to that extent will end up in physical misery and end up in psychological disturbance, because it's not going to solve any problems. It's not a good formula. But also, supposing none of that happens, then it's not a satisfactory thing because it has to be repeated. And how often will you repeat it? If you ask a child, well, what do you like the most? And they say, well, it's summer, I like ice cream. You say, well, I have good news for you. There's a truck coming along with a ton of ice cream. Well, after a few mouthfuls, they've finished with it. But the next day, they might say, oh, can you bring the ton back? So we know that it doesn't take much investigation to understand that it is not a useful formula, and indeed is a harmful formula, and therefore it's not preferable. So it's an endorsement of an assumed reality of the world. And by reality, we mean permanence. And it's not the case. Now, sooner or later, pain will alert us to this problem. It'll push us, it'll prick us, it'll give us and the worst pain that we can endure will be the pain of bereavement, of loss. But any disappointment is a bereavement, is a loss. And when you observe the stability of the mind, at some point you'll say, this formula is not working very well. It's not solving my problem. So when we talk about Buddha, that was his realization. The pleasure of the palace is not doing me any good. It's not giving me a sense of satisfaction and freedom. I may be avoiding, or I'm made to avoid, all the negative and miserable things. If we take, for example, the condition of the 18th century, 18th century in France, and which had a big revolution, it seems that the nobility and the clergy were completely insensitive and possibly unaware to the realities of the third state, which was the common people, who were suffering from starvation, unemployment, struggling through a bad economy, and then were taxed extra. Of course, there'll be a reaction. I'm not saying these are the complete causes of the French Revolution, but there were certainly fundamental factors within it. And so we cannot afford to ignore that. Same thing happened in Russia. So to ignore the pains of the world is not a good formula. It's like an ostrich putting their head in the sand.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you on this point. But the thing is, for example, when some people starve, they're in deep pain. What is the good pleasure for them is to eat, simply state. Yes. And to have or it can be like, because they are starving, therefore they have some medical assistance need. So what would be the pleasure? The pleasure to be healthy, obviously, because it's a pleasure to be healthy.
Yes, this is not hedonism. This is just looking after basic needs.
Well, yeah, indeed. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, as well.
Yeah. So hedonism is something different. It's an overindulgence on the basis that all our problems will be solved and all our reality is based on the senses, and it's not. Now, when the senses are deprived from normal living, in other words, when your instrumentation suffers and cannot work, naturally, your car needs fuel, your car needs maintenance, your engine needs to be run. It's no good keeping your car in the garage and saying it's a precious thing and I'll never use it. No, it's there. And if you, on the other hand, don't maintain it well, run it into the ground, never give it oil, never give it fuel. Well, if you never give a car fuel, I think you know what happens. You must have noticed. You'll be caught on the side of the road. You can't expect the fuel of a few liters in the tank will take you through vast mileage. No, it won't. So it's not to lose your sense of sensibility and rationality. You keep your instrumentation well tuned. Same thing with the mind. You keep it tuned by good occupation, right occupation in the language of the Buddha. Right thinking, right occupation, right meditation. You keep your mind tuned. You keep your power of attention like a fine-tuned instrument sharpened. This is the key. And you do it by, in a joyful way, in a happy way, by sharpening the capacity to imagine what you want, and the divine universe will yield it. It is your eternal storehouse. That's the point. Our restrictions on it are to do with our own self-imposed restrictions, where we feel we are limited. When we realize that our infinite source is our infinite supply, those restrictions get left behind. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. Other things will be added unto thee. Yes, we don't have to do it directly and struggle. It's a game. Just quoting this book again. Okay. All right. Well, if there are no further questions, we'll leave it at that. So, thanks. Yes.
Thank you, Swami.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Good. Thanks.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.